Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to all distinguished speakers and participants. Thank you for joining us today at the WSIS Forum 2022 session, Beyond Smart Cities, Smart for All, towards building inclusive and digitally accessible environments and communities to meet the needs of present and future generations. My name is Roxana Vitmeri-Riescu. I'm the Senior Coordinator for Digital Inclusion and Focal Point for ICT Accessibility, and jointly with my colleague Cristina Boetti, Focal Point for Smart Cities, we'll have the honor to be your ITU moderators and facilitators for today's dialogue. Inclusiveness is one of the 5 strategic goals of the ITU. ITU members also set an ambitious target for this goal, is target 2.9, which call to ensure digitally accessible environments for all people, including those with disabilities, in all countries by 2023. So the clock is ticking, and ITU works hand in hand with our members and stakeholders to support their effort in implementing this target goal. And we do so in many ways, including by leveraging capacities through making available trainings, guidelines, or toolkits, and by offering platforms to facilitate sharing of experiences, challenges, and good practices like this session today. With exceptional participation of leaders and experts in the topic coming from different parts of the world, this interactive dialogue also aims to contribute towards ensuring digitally accessible environments, cities, and societies for all of us, present and future generations. To kick off this session, I have the privilege to welcome Mr. Stefan Barreau, our Deputy to the Director of the International Telecommunication Union Development Sector, to give us a few remarks on the crucial importance of building smart and inclusive cities for all, and to launch a concrete resource that ITU has developed to support this global effort. Mr. Barreau, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, excellencies, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure for me to be here this afternoon to kick off this session of the World Summit on the Information Society. Information and communications technology, ICTs, have revolutionized our societies. For many of us, it's difficult to imagine our lives without technology. ITU's goal is to connect everyone, everywhere, and without discrimination. We aim to harness the power of technology to meet the needs of and empower all people, regardless of their gender, age, location, ability, or the context of their use. To ensure that no one is left behind in our increasingly digital world, ICTs should be available, affordable, and accessible to everyone, which means that they must be designed to meet the needs and abilities of as many people as possible. Given that ICTs have become, particularly since COVID, the primary medium for communications, information, transactions, education, and entertainment, ICT accessibility is key to ensuring that everyone is digitally included in society, and thus it can be a part of smart cities, environments, and communities. To successfully implement digital accessibility, it is essential to ensure that everyone's right to communicate in the digital world is respected and met. Therefore, to build smart ICT accessibility principles, requirements, and standards should be considered from the design stage to its implementation. During crisis and emergency situations, digital accessibility is vital for means of communication, information, and resources to those impacted. The COVID-19 pandemic demonstrated how digital technologies and ICTs can respond to a global crisis, but can also risk deepening the digital divide if these technologies are not designed and delivered in an accessible format. The common language of our increasingly digital world is digital accessibility. If we want to create inclusive and smart cities and societies, we all need to be knowledgeable in ICT digital accessibility, and we need to implement that in our work. Only if technologies are accessible to all can cities truly be smart and sustainable. Thus, ITU's mission is to foster smart societies that are digitally inclusive and accessible for all people. The term smart reflects not only the technological advances, but also equal and equitable standards and sustainable and environmentally friendly practices. In order to build smart cities, all stakeholders, including those here today, must be involved in the design and implementation processes to ensure that every potential end user can access and benefit from the smart, technologically savvy environment we create. ITU is advocating to ensure that technology is also human-centered. We promote the use of ICT accessibility implementation as a catalytic driver to achieve digital inclusion worldwide. ITUD, the development sector, has made valuable contributions to support global efforts in digital inclusion through the design and development of numerous resources that have been made available for all relevant parties and stakeholders free of charge in multiple UN languages and in a digitally accessible format. I think the link has been posted in the chat to some of our resources. Through our work, we support policymakers and relevant stakeholders from both the private and the public sector to build digitally inclusive smart societies and environments. Now, to foster implementation of these smart and inclusive societies, I have the pleasure to launch today ITU's first online self-paced training course, Beyond Smart Cities, Smart for All, toward building inclusive and digitally accessible environments to meet the needs of present and future generations. This online training course will be presented free of charge in English, French, and Spanish. And the key information that jointly with best practices will enable interested stakeholders to leverage their knowledge on how to build smart and inclusive cities and societies, and thus help to reduce the digital divide and inequalities worldwide. Dear colleagues, this session will raise awareness on the topic and on the relevant tools and resources that are needed to build these smart, sustainable, and inclusive cities, environments, and communities. We will highlight today not only the importance of digital accessibilities in the digital environment building process, but also the benefits that come along with its implementation, as well as the predicted challenges and solutions to those. We will share our commitment to address WSIS action lines, as well as the Sustainable Development Goals, and in particular, SDGs 10, 11, and 17, relating to the overarching goal of digital inclusion. We will shine the light on the importance of a universal design approach and the four main building blocks to building smart, sustainable cities: access, analysis, affordability, and accessibility. Although it may not be that simple as those four steps, today with your participation, collaboration, and expertise, we will highlight how digital technologies and ICTs can be harnessed to foster development towards smarter cities today and in the future. By joining forces to solve the global challenges of today, we can create societies that are smart for all. And in doing so, we will ensure that we continuously meet the needs of present and future generations. I commend you all for your ongoing support, dedication, and collaboration to achieve a more inclusive world. And with that, thank you, and back over to you, Roxana.
Thank you very much, Mr. Barrow, for these powerful remarks on ITU commitment to ensure digital inclusion of everyone, regardless of gender, age, ability, or location, and in building digital inclusive environments and cities for all. I have the pleasure now to sharing the video tutorial on the new ITU resource online self-paced training on Beyond Smart Cities, Smart for All. So the video, please.
Beyond Smart Cities equals smart for all, towards building inclusive and digitally accessible environments and communities to meet the needs of present and future generations. Cities and communities are increasingly influenced by the evolution of technology. The term smart is frequently used to reflect this technological progress. Additionally, the smart way to build our world is to ensure smart for all. This means being digitally inclusive and accessible for all people, and empowering everyone through information and communication technologies, or ICTs, regardless of their gender, age, ability, or their context of use. Many smart cities' responses to COVID-19 have demonstrated how ICTs can successfully manage emergency situations, but also carry the risk of deepening the digital divide. For example, digital platforms to book vaccination appointments were widely used across regions. However, not all digital platforms were accessible, leaving some vulnerable groups behind, such as blind persons who faced barriers to make their appointments online. A universal design approach is commonly applied to physical environments. Nevertheless, the universal design principles also need to be considered in all technological products and solutions to ensure that all potential end users can interact within a smart city, environment, or community. Building smart, sustainable cities, environments, and communities for all requires 4 main building blocks. 1. Access. To have the infrastructure enabling high-speed communication networks, devices, and technologies which allows everyone to connect. 2. Analysis, data protection, and cybersecurity. To guarantee that raw data is analyzed and translated through applications and tools into carefully protected information. 3. Affordability. To ensure that all end users can afford both an internet connection and the technological devices needed to communicate. 4. Accessibility. To incorporate digital accessibility requirements, standards, and universal design principles at all stages of technological developments, thus creating human-centered digital environments. This ensures that everyone's needs, abilities, or context of use of technology are guaranteed. Smart cities change the way we interact with ICTs, the way we live and improve our quality of life. We must ensure that we build our cities, communities, and environments not only to be physically accessible, but also digitally accessible for all. This will ensure that we continuously meet the needs of present and future generations. Join our collective efforts to build inclusive and smart for all. For more information on Smart for All, see our online self-paced training course, as well as other related useful resources on the ITUD ICT Digital Accessibility website.
Thank you, Rossana. Thank you for the video. And I'm pleased actually to welcome all participants for today's session. Digital transformation is certainly having far-reaching impacts on cities and citizens, from enhancing operations efficiency and resource management in cities to creating new opportunities in giving better access to public services for citizens. So in our session, we will look at the importance of inclusion and accessibility. And we will also look at some of the tools that are available today that can help cities to build an inclusive environment for digital transformation. So please welcome our first speaker, Dr. Hoffman. Dr. Hoffman is currently working as the head of innovation and research section at Mada Center in Doha, Qatar, working on complex IT industry challenges and innovative projects to empower persons with disabilities and elderly using emerging technologies such as AI in alignment with the SDGs. So Dr. Hoffman, based on your experience in the IT industry and innovative projects in addressing persons with disability needs, how the Mada Center contributed to the development of the smart city projects, and which are the impact of such work in ensuring that Doha is a smart and inclusive city for all, and especially its inhabitants.
Thank you, Christina. Hello, everyone. And thank you, Roxana, for the invitation to join this panel about smart cities for all. And for sure, this topic now becomes a need, a must, and a need from persons with disability to be included within the society, within the new smart city concepts now around the world, and in alignment with the fourth industrial revolution now, and with the appearance of new technologies and cutting-edge technologies that most of the people are using if they are not from technical background. For this topic, let me share with you a very brief video, and with this video, I will try to talk about Qatar experience with the smart city and how we can make this journey accessible for everyone. And this was like a good opportunity that we did during a smart city event in March 2022, during the Smart City Expo Doha, and where we try to share our full journey in a smart city that we call Mshirib here in Qatar, and where persons with all kinds of disability are involved to see in practice how we can define the term inclusive smart city for everyone. Here, as you can see, this was the Meta booth, and where we try to do in each wall, like the inclusive journey for a person with disability, and we'll try to do it, to explain it very quickly within 6 minutes. So to give the mic also to my colleagues here and all the panelists. Here as an example, as we can see here in this photo, so we have an announcement inside the metro station, and this will be helpful during the World Cup 2022 in Qatar, and where we try to include the avatar technology translating in Qatari Sign Language, all the audio announcement inside the metro, and here it will give more information, more accessible for deaf communities in Qatar, and for sure we can provide such kind of information in Qatari Sign Language or in international sign language. Also, during the journey, so as we can see also that we try to make sure that all mobile application and also the website to purchase or to refill the ticket must be fully accessible and in following the WCAG guidelines from the W3C, and where all persons with disability can use the application without any issues and problems. Also, during the accessible transportation, we try to provide also accessible maps for everyone in Braille, in sign language, and we can also refer to avatar technology to make all information accessible for everyone. One of the main components that we can find in Smart City, which is the museums, and in collaboration with modern art museums here in Qatar that we call Madhaf, we try to make the full journey accessible for everyone. During his visit, for example, to Smart City Msherib, and here we try to use the latest technologies from the fourth industrial revolution, which is 3D printing, and we try to make a replica of all piece of art and artifact in 3D printing, and where blind people can try to feel the same, the size and the volume of the object, and even to get more information about the small details of all piece of art. And here during the exhibition, it was an opportunity to see it in action, how we can proceed with the 3D printing and how we can provide the full experience, in particular for blind people. Moreover, we can use the QR code to provide sign language interpretation of all the content. And in addition to this, and because the COVID-19, we try to provide a full and accessible virtual tour online. So this in particular for students with disability inside schools, and they cannot go and visit the museum. Also, we try to present the hologram technology for a real human size sign language interpreter in real time that can be embedded in airports, in metro station, in malls. This will give more information, more accessible for everyone. Not only was limited to this for the smart city, also we try to make the retail and the coffee shops accessible for everyone, in addition to provide an accreditation program for ATM, automatic teller machine, that are accessible for everyone, as you can see. So here was our experience about implementing real cases of smart cities for all, through different kind of scenario. And here, as you can see, this is an app that can that able to recognize bills for blind people. So this was like a very brief tour about what we are doing here. And for sure, in the upcoming question, we can go in deep about talking about the frameworks and how we can ensure the accessibility for everyone.
Thank you very much, Dr. Othman, for these inspirational insights and for sharing with us concrete action and examples to ensure that we build smart and inclusive for all, as you have done in Doha, with provision of sign language interpretation, with hologram technology, with ATM and transportation accessible, with accessible maps, and even with 3D printing to facilitate blind people to perceive this art experience. I really think these are a valuable and inspirational example on how to build smart and inclusive. And now I have the privilege and the pleasure to introduce to you the head of the Global Economic Intelligence Unit in the Ministry of Economy in Mexico, Dr. Monica Duhem. And Dr. Duhem, you are a worldwide recognized advocate for the need of implementing ICT digital accessibility as a key element to achieving digital inclusion of all people. So based on your experience and expertise in digital inclusion, do you believe that the rate of ICT use in cities is widening the digital divide? And if so, which are the most effective groups that could be left behind because of this lack of digital accessibility of products and services? And finally, how we can reverse this situation to build smart for all.
Thank you very much, and hello to all. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with you. From my experience and what I've seen in governments, of course, we know of the impact of the use of technology to really make a better service and scale the services that we provide as government and as cities. And the problem is that the people that are buying those technologies, and are not articulate with some of the standards that we need to cover. From one side, we do have the service that we need to provide. So IT departments in cities are more focused on the service that they need to provide and on the scalability of the service. But sometimes they forget about the inclusion of the expert, but because we do not have inclusion experts in the IT departments. And this is the worst part of that is once we are going to buy a service or a product, is not the IT service that does that, but the procurement department within the cities that also are not experts on accessibility. So when we describe a service and then we pass the procurement requirements to the procurement bureau at the cities, they're more focused on variables like affordability and price than universality of the service. So the result is that since we do not have accessibility experts either in the IT services or in the procurement services of the city, people like indigenous people, elderly, persons with disabilities needs are not taken into account when we are buying or developing a service. More and more cities do have developing sectors and development areas of services within the government, but do not have experts on accessibility. So my recommendation is we are aware of cybersecurity and security issues with our services because we do have private information from our citizens. So we do have experts on security, and we need to push to also have universal and accessibility experts within our teams in the government, within the development team, within the IT department, as well as procurement. If we do not have that, the result is we do have services that are providing crucial services to the citizenship, but variables as accessibility are not included. So elderly people with disabilities are not able to use the services with the same right that anybody else. Technology is changing. I know that vendors and smart city solutions are very good vendors, and they're selling us very good solutions. And in their selling speech, they're not including accessibility and inclusion part. So we are buying solutions that are very good, but are widening the digital divide.
Thank you so much, Monica. I think that you raised some crucial points, especially in providing services, but not really taking into consideration about all users. So there is really a lot of work to do, and I'm very pleased actually to welcome our next speaker, Mr. James Huston, the Vice President of Global Strategy and Development in G3ICT. So he leads the design and implementation of worldwide advocacy strategies and programs to scale up G3ICT's global impact. So I think, James, well, you are an international technology policy leader. So is it possible really to define what we mean exactly by an inclusive and accessible smart cities? And are really any first steps that you would recommend for cities that would like to make sure that technologies and smart solutions that are deployed really work for everyone? So, as Monica was mentioning, are we really, including everyone regardless of their age, gender, or ability to use technology?
Sure. Thank you so much for inviting G3ICT and me to be a part of this important conversation and for your leadership in this area as well, Christina. And building on what Dr. Duhan was saying, I think we need to start with the unfortunate reality that today smart cities are actually making the digital divide worse, not better, for people with disabilities. And we actually know that based on how we define and measure what is an inclusive smart city. So G3ICT, my organization, we're an international nonprofit. We run a global initiative called Smart Cities for All. And in this project, we work with cities around the world, we work with partners. And as part of that work, we actually did a global study over a period of more than a year that included focus groups in smart cities around the world in a survey of hundreds of experts around the world. And 60% of those experts told us that today, smart cities are failing people with disabilities. And again, building off a little bit of what Monica was saying, just 18% of those experts were aware of any smart city that today is using very robust global ICT accessibility standards. Those standards exist, but cities aren't using them. They're not aware of them. So we do have enough information today, I think, to define in a really actionable way what is an inclusive smart city. Maybe before we define what that is, it's important to think about how we define what a smart city is. There's lots of different definitions of what a smart city is. I sometimes say there's as many definitions of smart cities as there are smart cities. I think for us, at the core of a smart city is using technology and using data to support the broad range of really important services and activities that every city in the world provides to millions of people around the world. And when we're thinking about technology, we're thinking about not just leading edge technologies, but also mainstream technologies that are really a part of this significant and global digital transformation of cities. For us, we sort of let cities opt in and define themselves as a smart city. If they have a mobile app and a website and they want to call themselves smart, that's great. We just want to make sure that that mobile app and that website are accessible to people with disabilities. And really every city in the world, global north and global south, is undergoing some level of digital transformation that makes accessibility critically important, that makes inclusion really important as part of that digital transformation. They're all becoming smarter. So in our Smart Cities for All initiative, we've developed a set of tools. They're available in 10 or 11 languages at this point. But one of those tools, Christina, specific to this question of defining an inclusive smart city, one of those tools is a maturity model assessment tool. And in that tool, we have 27 different variables that define across the board what it means for a city that is using technology, that's using data, what it means for it to be inclusive in the use of that technology. And for each of these 27 variables, there's 5 different levels of maturity. Level 1, meaning on that variable that the city is not doing much or they're not very good at that variable. Level 5 being world-class. And we've grouped these variables into sort of 5 pillars or thematic groups that allows us to work with cities and understand their approach to using technology and data and how inclusive they are. And it really does become, I think, the backbone of a robust definition of what an inclusive smart city is, these 27 variables. And so for us, I'll just mention a few briefly. One of the pillars or groups of variables that we look at with cities is their strategic intent. What is the role of the leadership in their city? Are they engaged and aware of disability and accessibility? We look at, does the city have a digital inclusion strategy specifically that references people with disabilities? Do they include disability and accessibility as part of their other important city strategies like economic development and tourism, transportation strategies? All of those need to reference accessibility as well. Does the city have a business case for inclusion and accessibility? Do they see accessibility and inclusion as a competitive advantage for the city? We look at a range of variables around culture. how the city has a culture of community engagement. Are their communications channels themselves accessible? Do they make particular efforts to do outreach to communities of persons with disability? Do they have a culture of diversity? Is the city actually hiring, making efforts to hire people with disabilities as part of their workforce, which is important? We look at a range of variables around governance and process that really defines an inclusive smart city. Does the city have KPIs and metrics specifically on accessibility? Does it manage to those metrics? Does the city have an organizational structure that really supports progress on inclusion and accessibility as part of their IT department, or is there maybe a department for people with disabilities? And then, of course, the other pillars or groups of variables that we look at are around technology and data, the backbone and the lifeblood of smart cities. And there we're looking at, does the city even know that the technology that it's deploying is accessible? How does it know? What does it do when it's not accessible? What's the remediation process? And with data, we really work with cities to understand whether or not they know if the key data sets that they use to manage their city services, are those data sets reflective of people with disabilities in the city? Too often we know people with disabilities are data deserts. They're not included in contributing to these really critical data sets that are being used for all kinds of important city policy and programmatic decisions. So that's really how we define what an inclusive smart city is. And in terms of first steps, one of the things that I know you at the ITU believe is an important step, and some of our partners here in this session is what I call the low-hanging fruit of inclusion and accessibility from a government perspective, and that's procurement. Cities are enormous consumers of technology. They're buying the market for smart city solutions and technology worldwide is in the trillions of US dollars. What if those investments in technology, those deployments of technology were of accessible technology? Too often today, they're not. Cities are investing in technology without asking the question of whether or not that technology is accessible. And so we've partnered with the G20 Smart City Alliance, the World Economic Forum, and other partners around the world to actually help cities adopt a model policy for procurement as a way to make sure that as they are spending money on technology, that they're asking specifically in those RFPs and tenders whether or not that technology is accessible. And we know this kind of policy works because governments like the US federal government have been doing this for decades. And so we just finished working with the city of Los Angeles. We're about to announce a new city next week that we're going to start working with. And we're actually have 4 more openings in this program to work with cities to adopt this G20 model policy for procurement of accessible technology. And that really is an easy step, relatively easy for cities to take to get started and make progress on being more inclusive.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Thurston, for these clear remarks on the crucial situation that actually smart cities are facing today, and on the importance that ICT products and services provided within this digital transformation, such as simple mobile app, should be designed and built to be digitally accessible for all its intended users, which is not always what industry manufacturers keep in mind. So we also retain the importance that from leadership, such as policy and decision makers, to operational staff, we all should be committed to build inclusive, to develop inclusive products and services by implementing ICT digital accessibility requirements, principles, and standards. And by passing to standards, I have the pleasure to introduce to you Mr. Young-Jin Lee, President of Center for Accessible ICT in Korea. And Mr. Lee, based on your extensive work in ICT accessibility within the Korea Center of Accessible ICT, as well as with us here in ITUT in the development of accessibility standards, what is the role of these standards when we refer to smart cities or related services? Could you highlight why, first of all, we need to implement such standards and indicate which are their role to secure accessibility for persons with specific needs, which can be person with disability or person with age-related disabilities in the building process of the smart cities and environments.
Thank you, Roxana and Christina. Thank you for this wonderful opportunity today. And I have been developing IoT and smart cities accessibility standards through the study group 20 of ITU over the past several years. So today I'm going to talk about the importance of accessibility standards based on my experience in developing standards. Well, the smart city services provide a more convenient means for those without disabilities, but they become a tool for the persons with disabilities to use city services that they have never used before. This means that it can be used as an important tool for persons with disabilities to change the paradigm. It means that it is an important tool to dramatically improve their quality of life. This means a lot to persons with disabilities. The role of ITUT can be considered in two ways. The first is the development of accessibility standards that reflects the needs of persons with disabilities. Since 2016, we have been developing the accessibility standards of smart city services and IoT through ITUT's Study 20, which is a study group for IoT and smart cities and communities. The development of these accessibility standards can faithfully reflect the needs of persons with disabilities, an important stakeholder for smart city services. The ITUT recommendation Y.4204, the accessibility requirements for IoT applications and services, is the first accessibility standard in this area of all international standards development organizations, and it is an important standard for reference in the development of IoT and smart city services. Starting with this standard, we are continuously developing various IoT and smart cities accessibility standard series. The second role of ITUT is to consider accessibility to many other smart city standards. Many of the standards developed in Study Group 20 of ITUT, especially those such as requirements, capabilities, use cases, etc., should be developed in considerations of the accessibility of persons with disabilities. In the last 5 years, I personally have witnessed many cases where accessibility for persons with disabilities is not taken into account in the development of various smart city-related standards developed in ITUT Study Group 20. Those with technical backgrounds involved in developing standards can easily ignore the needs of persons with disabilities, even though they are developing standards with good intentions. Even if they recognize that they need to consider persons with disabilities, they often consider the easiest way within the range of understanding rather than finding a solution through a holistic understanding of accessibility issues. We believe that considering accessibility for persons with disabilities in the development of these standards will help develop accessible smart city services. If you will, I believe accessibility should be considered as much as the level of security or privacy is considered in the development of many standards within the ITU. While the role of standards may vary, but from an accessibility perspective, standards are significant in that they define minimum requirements for the level of accessibility to be considered by smart city service developers. Accessibility standards for persons with disabilities are required to provide development guidelines to smart city developers and to understand accessibility considerations for persons with disabilities in developing their services. The two accessibility standards that we developed through the ITUT Study 20, the ITUT recommendation Y.4204 that I mentioned before, and the Y.4211 accessibility requirements for smart public transport, both standards all take a significantly different approach than conventional standards. Existing standards are written as concisely as possible about normative technical contents and are focused on definitions rather than explanations. Our accessibility standards, however, focus on providing normative text along with explaining why they are needed. This way of writing is for the technicians who do not understand accessibility. In addition, we try to put as many educational use cases as possible in the appendix to improve understanding of accessibility. Some people might wonder if it would be better to write a technical report rather than a standard for this direction of writing. Developers indeed need a variety of white papers or technical reports to understand accessibility. However, we have not seen many cases of increased understanding of accessibility or improved accessibility despite the presence of numerous technical reports in the past cases. I think this is a problem caused by the difference in interest. When developers refer to technical reports, they already know what they need and look for the technical reports to learn them in detail. However, many technicians are not even aware of the need for accessibility in the first place, and therefore technicians are often not looking for accessibility related technical reports. They often think it's not their job. Therefore, it is necessary to integrate, one, the reasons why accessibility is needed, and the second, the specific applications method of securing accessibility when developing services into one document. In this manner, I think standards are more effective than in technical reports. If standards exist, persons with disabilities may more effectively be able to ask to comply with specific standards beyond the vague requirements for accessibility. This should help improve the practical accessibility of smart city services. It is not just a question of whether standards are needed or more technical reports are needed, but the development of both specific accessibility standards and various technical reports can help developers who have less understanding of accessibility to develop accessible smart city services. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lee. And I think that you have really highlighted a crucial, important points related to, how standards can make a difference, how we can also bridge the gap, an educational gap, especially when solutions are provided. And also, as it was mentioned by James before, the fact that accessibility, as you also mentioned, like security, should be, equally considered in the development of standards and the implementations of solutions, and most importantly when cities and governments put in place new policies. Indeed, actually, I'm also pleased to share with you that very recently we launched a toolkit on digital transformation for people-oriented cities and communities, and this toolkit brings UN expertise to guide cities in planning and implementing digital technology solutions, including a model that really deals with accessibility and digital inclusion. So I really encourage you also to have a look at our toolkit and at the module on accessibility, and suggest if there are any other resources that should be added. And with that, I would like also to ask now, our first two speakers, Dr. Hoffman and Dr. Duham, based on your experience, which are the main challenges and opportunities in building smart for all? So, really how we can build smart, sustainable cities that are truly inclusive for all.
Thank you, Christina, and thank you for all the panelists. And it's a good topic. Maybe it's not like to say it's a challenge as itself, but one of the things that we take in consideration during the implementation and designing frameworks for smart cities for all, which is the inclusion of people with disability within the process. And this is something very important for us to identify their needs. This is the first thing. And also to be sure that once they are part of this smart city journey, they can get benefit and they are enabled within these cities. So this is one of the things that we can consider in one of higher priority. Second, which is one of the things that we are working nowadays, which is to have an ecosystem that enable and that empower the number of solution and innovation for smart cities that are dedicated for persons with disability in terms of use. Most of the ecosystems that we can find nowadays are more oriented business side and more oriented to go to the market softwares and solution without any interest in inclusion and in making the information accessible for everyone. So having such kind of an ecosystem, this for sure will increase the number of assistive technology, the number of ICT accessibility solution, and where everyone can get the benefit of it. And this will for sure will accelerate the road to smart cities for all.
Yes, thank you. And I also add, as governments, we do have the leverage to create those ecosystems. If as government, we do only buy accessible design or accessible products and services, vendors will will want to comply. And that's for instance, some of the services assume that we're using right now at the beginning of the pandemic did not have the closed captioning function, for instance, which is important for persons with a hearing disability. And now we do have that kind of function. And why do we have it? Because we, as buyers, we do have the sort of power to create that ecosystem. So for me, it's so important that mainstream products and services are accessible, not only because if we do have specific products and services for persons with disability, we're also creating a kind of divide. So we as government, my recommendation is to not only to have persons with disability within our staff, but also to have experts. So when we are purchasing a product or service for our city, to make sure that in the requirements, accessibility is included. So we, for one hand, we create an ecosystem of accessibility products and services, but also in the other hand, we are putting down the prices because everybody will want to sell us their accessible products and service. So if we include accessibility from the beginning, we are creating the ecosystem and we are creating a competitive in terms of price of accessible and universal solutions. And I will close with what Dr. Lee just said. Part of making it accessible is to have those kind of reports, like the technician be aware that what are the requirements that we need as buyers of accessible products and services, and make them write the report and demonstrate to us buyers that they are thinking about this universality and how their solution is complying with those kind or with the needs of specific kind of buyer of users, not only persons with disabilities, but also the importance of the elderly. We are getting old, and with age, we do need some enhancement in the service. So let's make them to realize what are the specificality that we will need when we're getting old in order to be able to continue to use the products and services. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Othman and Dr. Duhem for these insightful remarks. Indeed, actually, governments are the biggest buyer in the world. So if governments include accessibility requirements in their invitation to tender, automatically the industry will align and we will all benefit from this. So going from this question to some concrete key aspects that can support, accelerate this implementation. Mr. Thurston and also Mr. Lee, what do you think would be the key aspects to really go from why and how? We understood why because we want to be inclusive, and how by let's say implementing some concrete solution mentioned before, but let's go in concrete. What really we have to put in place to implement and to accelerate all this process. James, perhaps if you want to go first.
Sure, it's a great question, and I think it's important to start with the I think a good realization that today where we are when it comes to disability awareness and accessibility is dramatically different than it was even 5 years ago. I've been doing accessibility work for nearly 20 years worldwide. And the kinds of questions that we get today, the kind of work that we do today is qualitatively different than a few years ago even. And a colleague of mine likes to say that no business, no city sets out to make their technology deployments, their websites, their mobile apps, their digital services, they don't set out to make them inaccessible. They want them to be accessible. They're just not aware of the need to do that and how easy it can be to do that. And so I think one of the most concrete things, in addition to procurement, which we've talked about, one of the most concrete things that we talk about with cities and work on with cities is moving to role-based training. That we need to move these professionals, whether they're procurement professionals, IT professionals, human resource professionals, all of them need to have, I think, better training, more training on what disability and accessibility means in their specific roles. And that the good news is that training is available. You can get it from lots of different sources. Our G3ICT, our nonprofit, runs the International Accessibility Professional Society. But we need to start moving our professionals in cities, in different departments, to a much more role-specific and detailed level of technical competence on accessibility. And I think that's an area that cities can start moving into. I actually see some of the cities that we're working with now, when they're hiring staff, whether it's IT staff or staff in different departments, they're requiring some certification on accessibility as part of, and it's in the job description as they're hiring. And I think moving to a much more professional approach to accessibility in cities is an important first step.
Thank you so much, James. Dr. Lee?
Well, through today's conversation, I believe all the other panelists made a lot of good suggestions on various viewpoints. Well, I'm going to talk about it from the standpoint of developing standards. I think it is important to increase the understanding of accessibility of developers and policymakers. I think many people agree that accessible smart city services are important, but it is also true that they don't know exactly what to do and how to do it. Service development has been focusing on making good use of services for the vast majority of people. Therefore, they have made great effort to satisfy the center of the normal distribution. However, accessibility must satisfy the tail of the normal distribution, so that that's the essential difference. Unlike centers with many common elements for the tails, everyone's needs are different and complex, and there are a lot of factors that developers have not even experienced. The role of standard organizations like ITUT is here. Developers need to be specific about what to do and how to do it. The minimum level of accessibility should be considered, and the directions in which the service should be designed should be indicated. It needs a standard that contains actionable accessibility considerations that can be used in common in all services. I think this is the key. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Lee, and also thank you very much, Mr. Feston, for your excellent interventions. I think that these are crucial aspects that will certainly support the implementation, and I do believe on the fact that we have our own key role to play in ensuring that, really accessibility become, one key requirement, especially for cities.
Christina, I think both of us were really very bad timekeepers, but with all these passionate and very interesting remarks, it's very difficult to keep the time as scheduled. So I would like to ask all speakers and panelists to make their, one sentence or one word. What is, if you should choose one thing you would like us to take away from this conversation, which this would be? So first of all, I would like to ask our Deputy Director, Mr. Barrault, what do you think?
Thank you, Roxana and Christina. It's been a great session, and I unfortunately I won't say exactly one. I will say four. The 4 A's, the building blocks, as discussed earlier. We have to have to connect. Firstly, to connect anyone, we need access and infrastructure to enable everyone to connect. We need then, when we're looking, we need to ensure that that is secure, and we need to protect our data. So we need cybersecurity. We need so in that sense, analysis, data protection, and cybersecurity. It needs to be affordable. So affordability, to ensure that all end users can afford both internet access and technological devices that are needed to communicate. And then we need to, of course, incorporate digital accessibility requirements, standards, and the universal design principles at all stages of technological development. Thank you.
Cannot agree more. And Dr. Othman, please.
Yeah, I agree with Vero, and also maybe in one word we can say that joining efforts, so that all organizations work together for the benefit of everyone.
Absolutely, only together we can make the change. Dr. Duhem.
Thank you. One word is difficult, but I just say two things. One is, it's our responsibility in this digital transformation to understand and use technology, because it's the new means for interaction. So as citizens, we need to use technology and have the literate and the knowledge of using it. And us as vendors, we need to make sure that everybody are able to use it, so to make it accessible.
Thank you. So technology should be human-centered and design and develop it with all the needs and requirements of all of us in mind. Mr. Thurston?
Sure, I think I would end by just saying pretty simply, 2 cities in which cities get started. There's really no reason today that you can't be making incredible progress on taking steps to improve accessibility and inclusion as part of being a smart city. Several of us have mentioned lots of tools. I've been putting some links in chat. The good practices, the resources are there. The partner ecosystem is there. And so really just getting the leadership in the city, whether it's the CIO or the disability commissioner or the mayor's office, getting them started, I think is really important. And there's nothing holding you back at this point, including the great resource that you announced today.
Thank you. So we definitely have to ask our leaders within ITU and globally to put accessibility among their priorities in their political agenda. And last but not least, Mr. Lee.
Thank you. For the many developers, I think accessibility enhancement is a time-consuming and costly monster. The initial concern for accessibility started with improving existing services. We couldn't fix everything, so we had to patch everything up and down, and the complexity of the system increased. In fact, if you make it from scratch with accessibility considerations, you don't need more time and you don't need more money. That's why we emphasize the accessibility of emerging technologies like smart cities. Smart city services are still in the early stage. It doesn't take much time and money to make it accessible from the beginning. As the philosophy of universal design emphasizes, if you make it right from the beginning, accessible service is not difficult. I would like to conclude with the word follow the standard and follow the accessibility. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lee. So it means it's very, very timely to increase the awareness raising, because we all want to build smart cities. We are all engaged in digital transformation and enabling environments, but we forget that if now we do not consider accessibility from the design stage of these smart cities, environment, and communities, it will be much difficult afterwards. So an encouragement, a final encouragement to consider accessibility requirements, principles, and standards in all our work. And with this, Christina, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Roxana, and thank you very much to all the panelists that have shared with us, their expertise and incredible knowledge. Thank you so much also to Stephen that has been with us delivering opening remarks and participating in this panel. So I think that if possible, I'd like now to conclude this event with a video with a few words that Dr. Bilal Jamoussi, Chief of ITT Study Groups Department, would like to share with all of us and on this important topic. And with that, I think that we can conclude the event probably with a few minutes behind the schedule. But once again, thank you very much. And for all participants, in case you have any questions, please put them in the chat and we will get back to you via email. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for the excellent moderation to both Roxana and Christina. I want to express my appreciation to the speakers and panelists for their contribution. I'm also very pleased that we have had the opportunity to join forces with ITU Telecommunications. Thank you for the excellent moderation to both Roxana and Christina. I want to express my appreciation to the speakers and panelists for their contribution. I'm also very pleased that we have had the opportunity to join forces with ITU Telecommunication Development Bureau, BDT, to organize this workshop today. This workshop is an excellent example of how ITUT and ITUD are working together to accelerate digital transformation and make cities inclusive for all. ITU is committed to building an inclusive information society and supporting meaningful digital inclusion, particularly for underserved communities and population groups. I think the workshop has been very effective in highlighting the need to adopt a universal design approach, not only for physical environments, but also for the judicious adoption of technologies. We've heard from our speakers and audience today that digital accessibility and inclusion are vital in successful digital transformation. We must work toward creating and enabling an inclusive environment where the benefits of digital transformation are shared by all, regardless of who they are. The concept of smart and sustainable cities has evolved as a means to leverage new and emerging technologies to solve growing urban problems and improve the quality of lives for inhabitants. However, on this quest, we need to be cautious. While smart and sustainable cities have the potential to revolutionize the urban landscape for the better, it also may unintentionally reinforce existing inequalities. In this scenario, it is essential that smart cities should adopt an inclusionary approach. One, to ensure that all inhabitants have the right to benefit from the technologies implemented. And two, to facilitate the delivery of services that support inclusion of vulnerable populations, persons with disabilities, and elderly individuals who may otherwise be faced by digital exclusion in communities. These individuals should also have the opportunity to have a voice in deciding what smart city strategies to adopt and how to do it to tackle risks associated with technology to bridge inequalities. More recently, the UN-led initiative, United for Smart Sustainable Cities, U4SSC, has also established a thematic group on enabling people-centered cities through digital transformation, which will pave the way for formulating a series of policy-based recommendations and assessment frameworks for driving digital transformation in an urban context, while improving smart and sustainable city governance. The U4SSC is an open platform for all interested stakeholders to please feel free to join the dialogue. ITU has recently published a toolkit on digital transformation for people-oriented cities and communities. This toolkit is a one-stop guide that contains the latest UN resources on building and promoting accessibility, inclusivity, sustainability in cities and communities. We worked with over 11 UN agencies and programs to develop this toolkit, and we are excited that the toolkit is finally available, and you can find it on the ITU website. On top of that, the ITU self-training program that was launched today is also already available on the ITU Academy website, free of charge, and it's available in English, French, and Spanish. I strongly encourage you to check it out. I want to quickly mention that the standardization sector of the ITU has also developed a series of technical standards that are supporting smart cities and communities to improve the accessibility of IoT applications and services. These standards are particularly useful for supporting persons with disability and specific needs to use IoT applications and services. You can learn more about these standards on the homepage of ITUT Study Group 20 on IoT, Smart Cities and Communities, which is the lead technical standardization group on this topic. Thank you again for all the speakers, the moderators, and all of you for joining us today, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.